All right, man. We are live, but I don't see anybody on yet.
Second.
So you don't think any of that snow's going to stick?
I don't think so.
Yeah.
It's not even, I don't think it's been below freezing yet here. And it's not, it's like 37 degrees right now. So
yeah,
I don't think it will. I wish the kids are laying down. If they wake up later, they'll probably have fun. We'll probably put shoes and coats on them and go out.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know what's gonna. They were predicting like 4 inches of snow on Saturday, and then all of a sudden they stopped predicting it. So I don't know.
Blue skies out there.
Yeah, it's like 50 degrees right now, or it's supposed to be today. So nice.
Yeah. It has hit pretty bad. Like last night, we got one of those, those like Ring doorbells that like have the video thing or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
At our new place, you can't really see out it's a weird setup to where if I'm ever gone for a few days,
right,
it would be harder for her to see out. So we got one of those so that Emily could see what's going on outside if somebody rings the doorbell. And so I was putting that up, and man, I was like, this is not a pleasant thing. I should have done this in like August.
Right.
All right. Looks like we're
we got some folks
here. Let's do it. Good to see everybody. We're going to be in Matthew chapter 10, continuing our studies in the sermons of Jesus in the Gospel of Matthew. And this is the second of those sermons. We spent several weeks on the Sermon on the Mount, which is a lot about what it means to be in the kingdom, the way we look at God, the way we behave, the way we are internally. This is a neat chapter. This is a neat little sermon because it's still about that stuff, but it's also about taking the message and the good news of the kingdom to others. The end of chapter 9 pictures Jesus looking at all the crowds and feeling compassion for them because they were like sheep without a shepherd. And then he tells the disciples, you guys need to pray that the Lord of harvest would send out more laborers. And then immediately after that, Jesus summons his 12 apostles and gives them authority to go out. And then the rest of this that we're going to start getting into today is kind of the playbook for how they were going to go proclaim the good news of the kingdom. I think you called this chapter the wonderful counselors. The wonderful counselor counsels his counselors.
Right.
I think another way to say this, just another title that someone could use based on the end of chapter 9 is it's the compassion commission. Jesus saw the crowds, everybody was in trouble, and his response was, okay, guys, those of you who've come to follow me, I want you to go out and do this. I want you to go tell people, and to your title, this is how I want you to do it, and here's the playbook.
Right. Yeah, a lot of times people refer to this as the limited commission as opposed to the Great Commission at the end of the book where he sends them into all the world. And I'll have some things to say about that, about why I think it's important to maybe have limited commissions first in our life, like some smaller thing that we might do before we take on the biggest of things. I'll have some things to say about that when we get into it, but
sweet. So let's do it.
Yep.
We'll read verses 5 to 15 and talk about that today. So Matthew chapter 10, starting in verse 5. These 12 Jesus sent out, instructing them, go nowhere among the Gentiles and enter no town of the Samaritans, but go rather to the lost sheep of the house of Israel and proclaim as you go, saying, the kingdom of heaven is at hand. Heal the sick, raise the dead, cleanse the lepers, cast out demons. You received without paying, give without pay. Acquire no gold, nor silver, nor copper for your belts, no bag for your money, nor 2 tunics, nor sandals, nor staff, nor for the laborer deserves his food. And whatever town or village you enter, find out who's worthy in it and stay there until you depart. As you enter the house, greet it. And if the house is worthy, let your peace come upon it. But if it is not worthy, let your peace return to you. And if anyone will not receive you or listen to your words, shake off the dust from your feet when you leave that house or town. Truly I say to you, it will be more bearable on the day of judgment for the land of Sodom and Gomorrah than for that town.
All right, good. Couple things that sort of stand out to me first. In verse 5, Matthew's comment before Jesus' words is Jesus sent them out. My version says after instructing them. Um, I do think that's important. Anyone who wants to sort of take the gospel to somebody or teach somebody, preach to somebody, any young man who wants to stand in a pulpit someday, I do think there is value in not going off, you know, half cocked, like not going off unprepared, putting some thought into it, knowing what to expect, thinking about like, what is it that I need to share or say is valuable. Um, but that said, it also doesn't mean you have to be an expert. These guys didn't know everything yet. These guys, in fact, are still going to have a lot of questions, a lot of failures, even surrounding how they understand Jesus. So there's something that they share here um, without even fully understanding or grasping the reality of the whole situation. Um, and so I think that's valuable. I think it's important to know that.
Yeah. Yeah, I fully agree. I mean, this whole chapter is a testament to we need to be prepared, equipped, guided, both on, well, not both, on what we need to say, the kinds of things we do need to do, the kind of things we don't need to do, our attitudes, the type of opposition we can expect, and how to respond to that, and what it's all about. There's so many instructions here that, I mean, there's a lot of like landmine instructions that some of these just little phrases Jesus said are like a whole like venture to understand. So I think that's great. But I also love that other point you made that there's a lot of things they're not really going to fully understand. Even the message that he told them to proclaim, and I don't know that Jesus is saying literally these are the only words I want you to say, but this is all they needed to say and had to say. The
Verse
kingdom
7.
of heaven is at hand. Like this is the message. And I think there's other examples of that, like in Mark 5, where Jesus heals the demon possessed man and he says, hey, I just got you clothes. You're just now not a crazy person. We just met. Go preach the gospel. Like he was actually the first apostle, the first one sent out, first time Jesus ever sent anybody. I know he wasn't a technical apostle, but he's the first one in the whole gospel story. And all he knew was that the Lord had been merciful to him and the great power that he had.
Right.
And so he went and told everybody. And that made a tremendous difference in the lives of thousands of people, according to Mark 7 and 8. So I guess that's a great reassurance to us that, yeah, we need to be learning and growing and trying to develop our capabilities and understanding, but also like whatever you know, at least go tell that. At least go figure out how to share that with others.
Yeah, very good. So when he tells them first in verse 5, he specifically tells them where not to go. Do not go in the way of the Gentiles. Do not enter any city of the Samaritans, but rather go to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. I mean, that's where it's limited. That's where he's giving them a very targeted audience.
Mm-hmm.
We could probably talk biblically, like why is that something he does with them here? You know, once we get to the book of Acts, we see that the Holy Spirit was going to play such an important role in helping Christians understand like God expanding the kingdom to the whole world and including the Gentiles, and even the Samaritans are part of the Acts story in Acts chapter 8. So, you know, but they're forbidden to do that. And you wonder if that's both a kindness from Jesus, because that was going to be a hard work that they would do. Imagine trying to explain to people that didn't know anything about the history of Israel or the Old Testament or the prophets, um, or if they did know something about it, like the Samaritans, it was pretty messed up, you know, like their version of it kind of thing. That would be challenging. That would be hard. Um, so what's the application of this? I'll just say, I have a lot of people ask me sometimes like, hey, I really want to become more evangelistic. I want to teach people. I'd like to share the gospel with some people. You know, how do I talk to my neighbors? How do I talk to my coworkers? Those are all great questions. But a lot of times I think the people that are asking, it's very overwhelming to think about talking to people that maybe are atheist or whatever.
Or I just
So
don't
what I
know.
tell,
I've never met them.
yeah, exactly. So one of the things I've suggested is if you really want to do that, start close to home. Look around in your own congregation at people that maybe attend and come, that you're friends with, that you know. Maybe they're even teenagers, or people that grew up in that congregation that haven't obeyed the gospel. And why not think about reaching out to them and saying, like, hey, I want to encourage you, I'd like to study with you, I'd like to help you get to a place where you can obey God. um, that's where, in many ways, I started doing it as a young man. And it was a lot more comfortable, in a sense. We spoke the same language. We knew kind of what we knew the same things. I didn't have to kind of start from square one. Though I really enjoy that now, that was daunting at the beginning to think about that.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I think actually on the flip side too, the starting close to home thing, I
Mhm.
think it is a lot of times and in a lot of respects like more comfortable and a easier access point. It also um you're putting a lot more on the line.
Yeah.
Like if I've got a friend at school and I ask them, hey, do you want to read the Bible with me? And I know we're gonna get to some stuff that's gonna be hurtful or whatever. Like I think about, yeah. Um, then I'm really I'm doing that because I really believe in the gospel and I really care about their soul. Whereas if it's a stranger, I may want to care about them, but I'm not going to care about them as much as a friend of mine or a family member or somebody I go to school with or whatever. And so I think this is another thing is Jesus was kind of making them learn to put their money where their mouth was, as far as you got to really do this with people that you care about, that there's a real investment in your relationship that may end up getting sacrificed because you care about them, because you care about the gospel and stuff. So I think that's another factor, is it ends up training us, because eventually we're all going to have hard conversations with people, whether they're close friends or family or strangers or people in our church or whatever. And learning to preach first those close to home is we're learning to do this regardless of the consequences or the potential costs in our relationships.
Yeah, very good. It's funny you use that phrase, put their money where their mouth is, and then he tells them, don't take any money with you, and we can talk about that here, and I think in just a second. I have a question about verse 7 when he says to them, go preach, saying, the kingdom of heaven is at hand. Um, do you think we can still talk like that? Like, do you think that's still a valuable way to frame the good news? Um, and if so, like, what does it mean? And what did it mean then to say, hey, the kingdom of heaven is at hand, is here? What do you think? Is that a timeless message, or was that only for the first century?
I mean, I think it is, mostly because, I mean, when I read every single one of the sermons in the book of Acts, like the way I take it is the sermons in the book of Acts are basically just different ways of packaging this message.
Right.
You know, I mean, Acts 2, the sermon is about Jesus is risen from the dead, and that means he's the king. The kingdom of heaven is here, and you need to straighten up. You know, even the one in Acts 17, which isn't as maybe on the nose with that, it speaks about how Jesus is going to judge the world. Well, who had the right to judge nations? Well, it was kings, you know, who would either win wars or judge their own people. So, yeah, I mean, I really think so. I think you see it all throughout the letters. This is kind of the gospel. This is the gospel. The good news is that Jesus is king and his kingdom is at hand. I'd say I always feel like it's a little fuzzy, and I'm not sure that I've figured out a good way to just start. I think I know in my head what I think about it being at hand, but I haven't figured out a way to describe that in a really satisfactory way. So how do you talk about that, the idea of it being at hand? Or I don't know, like, do you think the message is still relevant and still something we should talk about?
Yeah, I do, and I think we need to get better at figuring out how to say that in our current culture. Every time we meet somebody who is disenchanted with our kingdom or our nation, political messes, leadership failures, prosperity not being what it used to be, the blessings of living in the United States. I think that there's something to saying, yeah, I get it, but there's really good news because there's a different king and a different reality, a different kingdom with real blessings. And yes, a judgment to come. Sometimes people need to understand that. Um, but there's so many positive things about the fact that heaven has come down, and people can belong to this community of heavenly people. I know that I've figured out a few different ways to say that short thing to people. Um, I said it one time to my dental hygienist who was in my mouth asking me questions about like all the political upheaval and all that kind of stuff. Of course, I was trying to speak, but I couldn't speak very well. But she was pretty intrigued by that idea. She's like, "Oh, so that's what like Christianity's about." And I think we just need to get better at figuring out how to say that same thing, in
Yeah.
different.
And maybe for our to be able to do that, if I would spend more time meditating on what is the kingdom of God. So I had to go back and read the book of Isaiah, parts of Jeremiah, a lot of parts of Jeremiah, Ezekiel. I had to go back and learn about the kingdom God established with David. I just read the teachings of Jesus because he would use a lot of king language. Go read Daniel 7, stuff like that.
Mhm.
And then just think in general, though, what's so special about a kingdom? And it is some of those things you talked about. I mean, it's security. A kingdom is security. It's identity. I belong to something
Mhm.
that makes me have some sense of worth or whatever. I have hope. I have strength. All these kinds of things. That's what a kingdom means. And so then, whenever I hear people talking about politics, which ultimately it's a statement about security or about identity, well, then it's not just as I mean, I think it's good if we just say Jesus is King. That's a good place to start. But also to try to appeal to people that are like, hey, you know what? There's a more secure identity that you can have in Christ that doesn't change every 4 years or 2 years. And hey,
Right.
you know what? I know the economy's weird or things are changing in terms of the values of this nation, but there's a non-changing value system in the kingdom of God. That kind of stuff. That's a way to kind of appeal to people on these felt needs that the kingdom of heaven provides the answer for.
Yeah. Good. Very good. Very good. All right. So when he sends them out in verse 8 and gives them this authority to do some pretty extraordinary things, they could actually heal the sick and raise the dead, cleanse the lepers, cast out demons. But then he tells them, freely you received this gift, freely give. How much could these guys have misused that? Can you imagine having the power to like heal the sick? I mean, that's one of the biggest money making things in the world right now is healthcare. Imagine if you actually could do that, um, or bring dead people back to life for people who have just lost their loved ones, or how tempted would these young guys have been? And these guys were young. I personally think they were teenagers when they started doing this, but there's debate about that. How tempting would it have been though, if you had this power to like have a little side gig or like say, well, yeah, cough it up and I'll like do this thing for you. Um, I don't know all the ways to apply this when it comes to like us as Christians offering service, but for me personally, it's always been if somebody comes to me for counseling, of some sort, mainly spiritual counseling or whatever, I've always sort of struggled to think in terms of like charging them for that,
Yeah.
you know. Um, God's taken care of me and counseled me. Like, of course, like I'll share whatever I know. I mean, obviously, I'm not a professional. I'm not saying it's wrong for there to be professional counselors and things like that. But I think Christians just have to have an attitude that whatever God gives us as a grace, we pass that on, you know, free of charge without any obligation for them from those people.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's it. And in general, my life of preaching and teaching and trying to serve others, it needs to be exactly that. It needs to be a life of giving,
Yeah.
which I think helps because there are times where it takes a lot to try to teach somebody, to try to walk with somebody through some challenging questions or challenging circumstances or, whatever, not always being very appreciative or whatever it may be. But having the reminder that, like, hey, I received this freely and I need to just freely give it, and be willing to do that. Maybe that's counterbalanced a little bit by the stuff he says about, hey, if people don't receive you, they don't receive you. But in general, whoever will receive it, I should be willing to give it as much as I can, as much as I've been given.
Right.
I should give to others and not worry about what I can collect for myself. This isn't to make me feel better. And I think that is a temptation, whether it's financial or even like emotionally or something. Sometimes it can be like, I feel better about myself because I did XYZ. Well, that's not why we're doing this stuff. We're doing it because God's helped us. And by his grace, we're trying to extend that grace to others. We're not trying to collect things for ourselves or try to, I don't know, protect ourselves or secure ourselves through the work that we're doing. It's just an act of grace, which I think that's just part of where he pivots from, hey, you shouldn't be charging. You shouldn't be collecting from the work you're doing per se. That should be your motivation, at least. If people give to you, okay, fine. But that's not what it's about. It's about giving. And also, don't try to secure anything for yourself. Go without money, go without a coat, go without extra clothes. I'll just take care of you. You need to, it's an act of faith here for you to go out and do this. Let me provide for you on your way.
Yeah. Which is crazy to think about, isn't it? To just go and do that. And maybe this is a little different because they are going to their home, you know, their home crowd, they're in their own country, that kind of thing. But can you imagine? I know you've been to Africa, I've been to India. Can you imagine not taking money with you or not taking like supplies or clothes or whatever?
Starter told you about when we went to Sierra
Yeah.
Leone
And
and
I
we
was
were,
going to bring that up because
yeah,
God, it's like God almost forced that on you, didn't he?
yeah. And it was weird. And we had clothes, we had like clothes on and we had like extra pair of clothes. Although I had to like buy like socks and underwear and like, I'll just say a male large in America is not a male large in Sierra Leone, you know. But no, it was actually a pretty cool. We talked about that. Like this is cool, and we got our bags back in like a week. It wasn't a big deal, you know.
Right.
But I really can't imagine what these guys. It was an incredible act of faith and of simplicity. I think that they just were moving with the work. They weren't trying to weigh themselves down, or Jesus didn't want them to weigh themselves down with stuff of the world.
Yeah. I wonder if there's like two things going on here too. There was a test or a challenge for the guys going out for sure. But there was also a test and a challenge for the Israelites that they were going or they were going to be around and how they would react. When he says there in verse 10, the worker is worthy of his support, that phrase, he sounds like he's expecting these towns in Israel to take care of these traveling preachers, to bring them in, to be hospitable, like the law said, to show them kindness. And I wonder if in some ways there was a little bit of a test going on there
Yeah.
for those places where Jesus was seeing how the nation was doing with this. Um, for what it's worth, that phrase that Jesus uttered, a laborer is worthy of his support or a worker is worthy of his support. Paul quotes that in 1 Timothy 5:18 and calls it scripture. And I just think that's cool. Like all scripture is inspired, and a lot of times people think only Old Testament, but Paul was actually quoting Jesus that Matthew wrote by the time he wrote, 1 Timothy 5,
Yeah.
and calls it scripture. So,
Yeah. So on that labor being worthy of his wages, he kind of Jesus sets up the scenario, right? You're going to go to a town and
right.
you find who's worthy, which, like you were saying, the worthy people in a town in Israel would be those who had read the scriptures and they knew, hey, when there's one of your brethren who needs a place to stay, you give them a place to stay. That's what God expects us to do for each other. Love your neighbor as yourself. So go in, see who's worthy, and whoever receives you, that's great. Let your peace be upon them. And if they reject you, then take your peace back, whatever. But especially on this notion first of just going in and finding somebody who's worthy and basically pretty much being provided for by them and relying upon
Right.
them. How do you think that shows up for us? Because like that's I don't think this is saying, hey, preachers, just go to a random place and then just wait for somebody to take you in and you're going to stay at their house for the rest of it. Maybe that is, that would be bad if somebody did that, but I
Right.
don't know that's the exact application. But what do you think we're supposed to do with this as we're going around? If there's something for us, maybe this is something unique to them, but what do you think we're supposed to get out of this?
Yeah. No, it's funny. Did they walk into town and say like, "Hey, who here is worthy?" They didn't. How do you determine who's worthy? But like you said, I think it was finding some common ground.
Mm-hmm.
He was looking for people that took God seriously.
Yeah.
If you could find somebody in town that took God seriously enough to listen to the law and they came up like a lot in Sodom and Gomorrah and say like, "Come stay at my house," like that's what the law says. Think of like how much how much easier it would be to engage with them about the Messiah. They could say like, "Wow, I'm so thankful for you. Like look at like you love the Lord and you love his law and you care about what's right, and I'm so appreciative of that. I care about that as well. Let me now tell you the rest of the story." Um so I'd say that's how it shows up for me, when I'm going into public places. This is one of the things I missed this year is just studying out in public and having people, engage with me when I have my Bible open. But one of the things that I kind of do is I find out who's worthy, like who's interested, who has some thought about like, hey, that's important what you're reading, and I like to think about that and talk about that. And if I can find that common ground with them, I can usually end up in a Bible study with them or further conversations with them. Um, I'd say that's one way that we figure it out is, I always remember Harold Comer one time talking about who it is we're looking for when we're looking for people to obey the gospel. And he talked about this idea of sincere seekers,
Mhm.
those two things together. You know, we all know a lot of people who are sincere, like they're sincere in their beliefs, they're sincere in their religion, they're sincere in their philosophies. They really care, they really believe it, but they're not seekers. Like they don't want to be challenged. They don't want to look at anything different. They just want to believe what they want to believe, and they're sincere about it. And we may admire that, but if they don't challenge it or ask deeper questions or want to like hear something else, then they're not really seeking. On the other hand, we've all known seekers who weren't sincere. Hey, man, I just want to know what you believe. Like, that's kind of cool. I've gotten so many Bible studies with people that were just curious.
Yeah.
They weren't intending to change their life. Um, and I need to sort of recognize, how do I figure out who those people are? It takes some time. Um, but that's just always helped me in trying to figure out who's worthy and who do we stick around and keep teaching, or who do we move on from?
Yeah. Well, and like Jesus pointed out here, you're going to find out sooner
Yeah.
rather than later. And I think the implication is, um, there may be, when you look at verses 11, 12, 13, and 14 all kind of together, it looks like some people they were going to show up with, and it was going to seem worthy, or maybe they kind of
Yeah.
were in some respects, but then eventually the message was, I don't know, too strong for them, or it was something changed or whatever. And that's where it just takes time. I mean, there's a lot of, when we're trying to teach and preach to people, there's a lot of, I don't know, it's not trial and error exactly, but it's reaching out, and then it may not really go very far, but it went somewhere, and that's okay. And that's what Jesus says here: just go, do it, and as long as they'll receive you, let them receive you. And if they ever reject you, then okay. And I think just on your point about finding different kinds of people or whatever, or finding those who are worthy, that's going to look different. Sometimes the people who are worthy are people who come into church and they're like, listen, I grew up, I loved God, and then I went far away and I did a bunch of bad stuff, and I just need somebody to help me. Well,
Right.
those are like, I mean, they're like really close to the kingdom.
Right.
But I was thinking about one lady that we were studying with named, her name was Yahweh. She was from Taiwan, so it was almost Yahweh was her name. But she didn't know anything. She had been Taoist, she had been Buddhist, she had tried all these different things, and then somebody had recommended you should try like a Christian prayer group, I think. So she found us online. We started just reading the Bible, just doing the Bible story with her. She didn't know anything about it at all. Like we read Isaiah 50, we were working her through the story. We read Isaiah 53, and she was just crying. And she said, what kind of person would do this? This is amazing. Who is this person that it's talking about? Right. I mean, it was so like just really emotional.
Yeah.
What was amazing is she was like, one, she had said, come basically into my life. She was always there early. She would apologize if she'd be like a minute late. It was like, it's really okay. She'd always bring like candy, that was like her way of saying like, thank you for doing this or whatever. And I guess my point is she was as far away from the kingdom in some respects as somebody would think,
Yeah.
as opposed to that person who comes into
If
the
we're
church early or
understanding.
whatever. Right.
Right.
But really, she was really worthy. Like she was really, at least for a time, she really wanted to know. And I think that's just something good for us to remember. There's a lot of people that look different, different places on that spectrum of that closeness or whatever.
Yeah. Very good. One of the hardest things about this, and probably for us too, is knowing when to move on. You develop a care for people, and you're concerned about them, and you engage with them about spiritual things, and then at some point you get this sense that, okay, well, they're not listening anymore, they don't care anymore, like we studied in the Sermon on the Mount, casting pearls before swine and giving holy things to dogs and stuff like that. You know that it's time to move on. um, and so this idea of shaking off the dust of your feet, okay, I'm done with this, on to the next thing, on to the next person. It doesn't mean that we don't care about them. It just means that our energy needs to be put on finding the next thing to do, right? um, what do you think about verse 15, the idea that it will be more tolerable for the land of Sodom and Gomorrah than the judgment on that city? And we'll finish with this thought.
I think it's pretty bad for those cities.
Why do
I
you
mean,
think Jesus tells them that? Is it to comfort them? Because that doesn't sound very comforting to me.
yeah,
One of the things I've wondered is that something Jesus front loaded for them before they went so that they could say as they parted, listen, guys, if you don't accept this, it's been right in front of you. You have more information now than cities that have been judged in the past that had less information. You're going to be judged more strictly because you know this.
yeah,
I have to say, like I've left some Bible studies and studies with people or stuff saying something similar. Like, hey, I know you don't want to obey right now, but you need to know that judgment for you is going to be hard because you're going to know that you had a chance.
yeah.
And I actually have had people come back around at some point and say that haunted them, that stayed with them, it bothered them. So I'm kind of curious if maybe that's why he tells them this up front
Yeah.
so that they could use that as they leave.
And it shows sometimes I think some of us feel bad. I remember one of my friends saying, I've taught a lot of people, I've preached to a lot of people, but no one's ever been saved because of what I did. And it was kind of this like, I'm kind of a failure at this. And that resonates with me. I understand that feeling. Passages like this are helpful though, because if anything, Jesus mostly is talking about how people are going to reject you. And it's not like, and you did a bad job and that's why they wouldn't receive you. No, you just go out and preach. You proclaim the good news of the king's kingdom. And then you've done your job. And I don't mean like we should be negligent and not care. Obviously, we want everybody to come and be saved and become followers of Jesus. But if they don't, that doesn't mean you did a bad job.
That's right.
You did, if you're doing your job, if you're doing it the way Jesus wants you with the right spirit of humility and compassion, all that stuff, don't let the response of others get to you. It may be that the job you were supposed to do was to go out there and tell them so that on judgment day, God could say with total justice, depart from me. And I don't like that. I don't like that thought at all.
Right.
But I think this and other passages bear that out. And so it just changes our perspective on what quote unquote success is in this.
That's right. That's right. Very good thought. Hey, thanks everybody for being with us. We're out of time. We'll pick up here next week.
Yep. Looking forward to it.
We sure appreciate everybody being with us today.
Take care, y'all.